I think I'm going to make a video about something that I know a lot about and have no idea how to communicate. This is going to be a ramble. Hi everybody, welcome back to The Stash. My name is Jess. I am the owner and dyer of Skein and the Stitch, and Skein and the Stitch sells hand-dyed yarn and fiber out of my home studio in West Yorkshire. I thought today I'd make a really different type of video. So this video is going to be a prediction of different trends I see in the fiber arts community going into the winter months and also kind of throughout the rest of 2025 and into 2026. So I feel kind of weirdly uniquely qualified to talk about this because I run a hand-dyed yarn company. I'm kind of always looking at my customers' behavior, what the kind of things they're buying, what things they're kind of cooling off on. And I also have some friends who are knit and crochet designers. I kind of see behind the curtain a little bit about the thought that goes into their designs, where they kind of see their business is going. I think it'd be really fun to kind of talk about what I see, what I think will be trending. And I kind of want to go back to this video in like a year and see, was I right? What did I miss the mark on? You know, what did I predict that potentially could come true? So I thought it might be like a little bit of like a time capsule video. So anyway, I have a couple different categories I've like lumped this video into. So I think we should get started and I'll share my predictions with you. I also think it's kind of important to add the caveat to this video that I don't see anything really leaving the fiber art space. Like it's not like fast fashion. It's not like knitting colorwork is going to be not trendy and people are not going to do it. I see it as more things are going to be more emphasized and then but you're always going to have certain things be present in the community. You're always going to have knitting and crocheting being part of the community. You're always going to have like color work and garments and like different types of patterns, different categories are always going to exist. They're always going to be published. But I'm interested to see like what gets kind of pushed out to the front, what people really respond to and kind of gravitate towards. And, you know, the making community is not like fast fashion. You know, I think we're a little bit behind what is like the cutting edge of fashion. I think the knitwear and crochet patterns kind of responsively react to what is happening in terms of like clothing fashion trends and color trends. I think we're not like behind as in like we're not up to fashion, but I feel like because you have slower making your own garment stitch by stitch is a slower process. You know, by the time you finish another garment, you're kind of already behind what is the current fashion cycle. And also you have to think about that in our community, fast fashion isn't part of knitting and crocheting. You can't just whip out a garment in, you know, ideally a week or something. You know, like it takes time and it's very intentional and it's very a mindful consideration of matching your materials to your pattern. So you have that kind of aspect to the making community. Like I said, I don't think you're ever going to see something not be done in the fiber art space, but more of an emphasis. So that's kind of what I want to like emphasize with this video is just because I see a prediction in one direction doesn't mean you're never going to see something else. I mean, the fiber art space is also not immune to trends and things reoccurring, so you're going to see things come up again, kind of in like a cycle, I think. So yeah, that's kind of where I wanted to start this video and see where I think trends in terms of like consumer behavior are going, but it doesn't mean it's always going to be like that. I guess that makes sense. Anyway, so I kind of wanted to start off a little bit talking about where I think consumer behavior is going and then kind of break it into knitwear and yarn and like fiber itself. So I think spinning has been such a popular thing in the fiber arts community, and I have a theory as to why that is. So I believe that a lot of people really started getting into the fiber arts during COVID. I think it was already obviously quite existent before, but I think you had a very interesting space where people got to really focus on the craft and learn, and you had the rise of social media in terms of like dyeing and Instagram community, and that kind of flourished like around 5 years ago. But I think now people who have learned during lockdown or learned during COVID or learned, 5, 6, 7 years ago, or really started getting into the fiber arts community, they are now at the point where they're like, okay, I want to level up my skills. I'm really good at knitting. I'm really good at crocheting. I'm really, this is a craft I'm really enjoying. I want to dig further into it. And I think that is why you have people getting into spinning, is because they are, they're more tactily involved in the craft of that yarn. So they are choosing their fiber, they are playing with the color placement of that fiber, because there's different ways you can break down braids. They're playing with, the ply of it, is it 2 ply, is it 3 ply, is it an art yarn, what am I making with this? Am I aiming for a fingering weight yarn? Am I aiming for going for a DK weight? Am I mixing this fiber? So you have like a whole subset of crafters who are way more educated, more curious, more hands-on in the creation of the fiber and the yarn that they work with. So I think that is really feeding a lot of consumer behavior, and I'm going to talk about how I think that has a knock-on effect on the yarn they're purchasing, and like just trends in terms of yarn. So I think the crafts on the rise, like spinning, are directly kind of influencing some of the consumer behavior. Okay, so from my perspective, as someone who runs a small business, who has customers, and who regularly analyzes customer behavior in terms of, and that means like I look at what we're buying for my shop specifically. I look at kind of like overall trends in the marketplace. I look at the types of bases that I'm selling specifically to me, the types of colorways that are popular, what my customers are saying to me in, emails, Discord conversations, at yarn shows. I'm kind of like taking all of this data in, and I'm trying to sustainably run my business. So I'm looking at like, what am I going to do next year? What am I going to do next season? How am I going to keep my business running, keep my customers happy, keep them returning to me? So I'm very much trying to run my business in a way that aligns with my values and makes my customers happy. So I think I'm seeing a couple of different trends. Some of them go together, some of them don't. And I think you can have both things at the same time. Right? So I don't think it's an either or, it's an and. So I think we're going to be seeing a mix, a rise of mixing commercial yarns with hand-dyed. I know that's always been a thing. It's not a surprise. I think people have been mixing hand-dyed and commercial yarns forever, but I think we're going to see even more of it. I'd be interested to see partnerships between hand-dyers and larger commercial brands. I'm not talking like acrylic yarns. I'm talking like more, high quality commercial yarns, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I'm interested. I think you're going to see more people wanting to mix hand-dyed with commercial. And what I mean is, like, let's say you have a colorwork jumper, but your main one is in a commercial yarn, and your like the hero color, the standout yoke, is made in hand-dyed. So you're going to be mixing those. Potentially, if you have like a jumper that you have, you're holding something double like a suri and a fingering weight, your suri is going to be in commercial yarn because it's a little bit more cost effective to source your fluff with a commercial yarn than with a hand dyer. And also kind of, I think alongside that, you're going to have a rise of scrappy projects. I think because, we have inflation, things are getting more expensive, the tariffs, like I think in general, things are just getting more expensive, and people are now starting to look to their stashes and their scraps and thinking, okay, well, I have half a cake left over from this project. What can I do with it? And I think people are going to want to try more scrappy projects, make their yarn go even faster and further. Not faster, but you want people to get as much as possible out of the things that they're purchasing, whether that's commercial or hand-dyed. So I think you're going to see a rise in scrappy projects, scrappy aspects of it. I don't think that's ever going to go away. In terms of what I've noticed in terms of particular consumer behavior in my shop, I see a lot more of my customers are interested in buying semi-solid colorways. I think I have a theory about that. I think that semi-solid colorways offer more versatility. They can be repurposed in different projects. Let's say, you know, if you use half a skein for this project, you can take that semi-solid colorway and apply it to others. I don't think variegated yarn is ever going to go away. I don't think it's ever going to stop being popular, but I'm seeing like the balance, like whereas I used to sell lots of variegated yarn, I'm also seeing like more semi-solids now accompanying that trend. So I think it's a rising star from my personal observations. And I'm going to go into this a little bit more when I talk about yarn, but I think people are starting to focus more on their own local markets. I think you're going to see a rise in like the local yarn shop, the local yarn show. People want to know what's around them. They want to be aware of the dyers around them or the farms or the sheep. You know, people want to support local. So I think you're going to have a rise of awareness, whether that's like buying American, you know, reared spun yarn or you know, like hyper local, like this is the farm down the road that has sheep, I'm interested in that. So I think you're going to see a mix of that. And also you have more educated customers now. So I feel like I've been in my business for a couple years now, and I think as I've become more educated about the products that I sell, and I've, you know, become more educated about different types of fiber, and the longer I get in the industry, I realize that my customers kind of come along that journey with me, and we're all trying new things together. I just happen to be a couple steps ahead of my customers because I am now sourcing what I think they will like. So I don't think that it gets talked about enough a lot, but like a lot of my business, a lot of the people in the business, we do trend prediction without really realizing we're doing trend prediction, right? And this ties very neatly into where I think yarn is heading, right? So let's keep in mind you have a more educated consumer who is interested in different crafts. I think based on like kind of the people who shop from me, some of them are beginners. You know, it's not a monolith, it's more of like a bell curve. I think most of the people who purchase from me are quite knowledgeable about their craft. They've been knitting and crocheting for several years. They're spinning now. They're either starting to spin or they're experienced spinners and they found my hand-dyed fiber and they're wanting to work with it, or some of my custom blends, or my, you know, different things. So you have more of an educated customer base, and I think you're going to be seeing more and more curiosity with non-superwash yarns and fibers. And in my case, I have seen non-superwash yarn, particularly in my shop, really become more popular, and fiber specifically, like that has astronomically risen in popularity in my personal sales this year. It's also something like for me personally as a crafter, I'm not buying superwash yarn at the minute. I am interested in different types of fibers, different types of breeds, and I also think that the consumers in general are gonna becoming more curious about non-superwash yarns, but also like single origin breeds like BFL. We're seeing Corriedale, Wensleydale, Rambouillet, Cormo, Polworth. You're seeing people start to learn about these different breeds of sheep, aspects of their fiber, looking at like, oh, so if I spin this yarn with this Cormo fiber, it has these attributes, and then I can translate this into the garment or the accessory that I'm knitting or crocheting. So you're seeing people start to think about outside the box a little bit. I think people are starting to move away a little bit from superwash merino. Now, I don't think superwash merino is ever going to go away. I do not think it will ever like drop off. It is still one of my best selling bases ever in my shop, and I don't see that changing, but I think you are seeing like a rise in other things starting to come up and not compete with it, but come alongside of it. So I think a lot of customers and consumers have stashes with a lot of superwash merino, and that's all very similar bases, and I think people are starting to get not bored but curious. That's kind of the term I'm coming back to, is curious, interested. They want to try something new. They want to kind of dip their toe into something else. So my recommendation is always non-superwash merino. If you are a superwash merino fan and you're like, how can I get interested in non-superwash? I'd say go for the non-superwash merino. That is like your first toe into non-superwash yarns. By the way, my natural 4-ply and DK bases are some of my favorite non-superwash merino bases ever. I can talk about that in another episode, but if you are looking to try that, check those bases out. They are delicious. Anyway. So I think alongside that, you're seeing people interested in single origin breeds, looking at different fiber blends they don't usually find. So I think you're going to see people be a lot more curious with the content of their fiber, being interested in where it's sourced, where does it come from, you know, is it, I live in the UK, I'm really particularly interested in local British breeds and local locally spun bases to me, so I'm starting to source more of those for my shop, and I feel like that is like something you're going to see more of as time progresses. And as I said before, I think you're going to see a rise in commercial yarns. But with this caveat, I don't think you're going to see a huge rise in like acrylic yarn. I think what we're going to see is commercial yarn taking a turn for kind of like bridging the gap a little bit. So it's not as luxurious as hand-dyed yarn with like that kind of luxury touch to it. And it's not going to be like, you know, your acrylic yarn that sells for like £1 for a ball. I think commercial yarns are going to start filling the gap where you have more non-superwash, more like kind of luxury bases, or more curated bases that appeal to knitters who want to save a little bit of money. They don't necessarily want to buy a lot of hand-dyed, but they want to have something really nice, a nice medium to work with, really good for their knit and crochet projects. So I think you are going to see the focus on more specialty luxury fibers within the commercial yarn space. And I think you're going to see a difference in textures. I've noticed that sales of the Surrey silk lace, like the fluffy bases, have started to kind of go down for me personally in my shop. I think it kind of goes in cycles. It goes in cycles with the season. So during the summer, I get like no sales for Surrey, and then in the winter, the cold months, they always pop back up. So it does depend a little bit seasonally, but I think generally people are kind of moving away from more fluffy bases. And I also think this kind of ties into financially. People are like, well, if I want to knit this or crochet this pattern and it calls for holding, you know, a sock and a Surrey double to make a DK, why not just knit it in a DK, you know, instead of buying the sock and the Surrey, essentially like 2 sweater quantities to make one thing, why don't I just cut out the middleman and just knit it in the DK? So I think you're also seeing people trying to be a bit more frugal with their purchases in terms of that. I think you're also seeing, I mean, boucle is kind of more as like a trendy yarn. I think it's never going to truly go away, but I think you're seeing like the cycle of it not being as popular. And I think Surrey has been really popular for a long time. Like the idea you can pair it with a sock or a DK weight, and it like changes the texture and the color of the fabric you create. So I think it's never not going to be present, but I don't think it's going to be as popular. I also think you're going to see, alongside non-superwash yarns, I think you're going to see like more tweed. I think that tweed deserves a good moment in the sun. I think, you know, that is also starting to become more prevalent. I haven't seen a lot of merino cashmere nylon MCN base, so maybe merino cashmere is going to come back. Although I think if you have a really nice, beautifully low micron merino, so like my plush sock and my plush DK of like a 19 micron merino, which is really soft, is the same micron count as my non-superwash. So if you have like a really low micron count merino, you kind of don't need the cashmere, but I feel like you might see more rise of like camel and cashmere, like really luxury fibers. So if you are going to splash out, you're going to do it in like a really premium way. So I think you might see like those aspects of it. So yeah, to summarize, you're going to see a big spike, I believe, in non-superwash bases, more specialty bases. Like I said, camel, cashmere. I think you're also going to see a rise in like local non-superwash breeds, more focus on like sheep specific and custom sheep blends. And I also think you're going to see a rise in like really curated commercial yarns. So I'm curious to see if that actually happens, because I love that. I do love a good commercial yarn from time to time. Okay, and then the yarn inevitably transitions into patterns. And although I don't design patterns myself, I know a ton about them because I'm always recommending yarns for different projects. I have customers who email me and message me all the time saying, hey, I have this pattern in mind, or I want this project in mind. Do you have an idea of like the colors that could go together or the fibers? Like I would just like a little bit of help, which by the way, if you ever want to email me or message me with project plans and you have a specific thing in mind, please do. I love helping you out. This is like a huge part of my job that I take very seriously, and I take a lot of fun out of it. So I'm always researching patterns. I'm looking at Ravelry all the time. I'm purchasing a lot of patterns to read them, get more familiar with them. And I'm looking at also fashion trends. So I am have my eye on multiple things all the time, because the yarn I create, I want it to be fashion forward colors. I want them to be wearable. I want you to get a lot of enjoyment out of the yarn that you buy from me. And I want it to be something that you can wear. I want the colors that I create to translate into garments you wear, right? That's the goal. I don't want my yarn to sit in your stash. I want it to be used. I want it to be, something in your home or something on your body. So like I am thinking kind of fabric first. So with that said, all that said, I'm looking a lot at patterns because I want you to use your yarn in the patterns. So I think we're gonna be seeing a couple of interesting trends in terms of knit and crochet patterns. So I don't think, going back to what I said about the suri, I don't think we're gonna be seeing as many patterns holding something double. Again, caveat, that's not to say you're not ever going to see it, but I don't think you're going to see as much of it. So I think you have a consumer now who is a little bit more price conscious, who wants to see their yarn go further, and who doesn't really want to buy 2 sweater quantities for one project. I think they're just going to want to buy 1 sweater quantity for one project and then just, get stuck in. So I think you are also going to see more accessories coming to the market, more opportunities to stash bust, to use up the single skeins in your stash. So we're talking hats, cowls, mittens, scarves, shawls. I think we're also going to see more shawl patterns being released for 1, 2, 3 skein projects. Obviously, we have a lot of sock patterns. I think that's never going to go away. People are always going to want to knit socks, and obviously for good reason. But I think I've been noticing there's just been a bigger trend for garments lately. So people are designing cardigans, or they're just like seasonally you get like summer tees and tank tops. So I think you're also going to be seeing more garments being pushed out. In terms of like design features on patterns, I think we're going to see a bigger spike in cables, like texture, cables, lace, bubbles, like really big texture play. I think is going to be coming more to prominence. I think with things like doodle decks being so popular, people are always going to do color work. And I think doodle decks have been really interesting in the color work space because it's allowing you to stash bust, to use your scrappy minis or leftovers, and to create, also I think that's going to coincide with like the rise of accessories, because you have doodle decks being very popular in terms of cowls and hats and socks, and obviously like with full garments as well. So I think you're also going to be seeing more of the color work aspect. But I think alongside color work, I think something that hasn't been really done in a popular space before, something that I think is going to be more popular, is steeking. We haven't had a good steeking moment in a while. So I think steeking could be really interesting to see as a trend, like the color work cardigan that you steek up and then you do the button band. Obviously there's like a level of skill, but I think as customers have been knitting and crocheting and crafting for a couple of years, I feel like that is like a next a challenge that people are going to want to rise to. So I think you're going to see more steeking patterns being created and more opportunities to see that on social media. So I'm curious, and I'm excited to see if that comes true, because I do love a good steek moment. I haven't steeked myself, but yeah, I do love a good steeking wheel. I also think that with people who, like myself, know how to knit and crochet, you are going to see more patterns that combine different techniques, different crafts. So I know there's a couple of them that have like crochet elements with them, but I think you're going to see more knit and crochet together, which is really exciting. So I think that's I've seen a couple patterns popping up and I'm like, ooh, I think that's going to be popular and a trend. So yes, I think you're going to see less less multiple yarns held together. I think you're going to see the rise of smaller projects, scrappy projects. I think you're also going to see potentially some steeking, cables, lace, texture play, a ton of it, and a mixing of motifs. Wouldn't that be so much fun? So, okay, I think that wraps up some of my predictions. I think that will be happening as we move into the colder autumn and winter months, and I think into 2026, potentially even longer, because I think trends with the fiber arts community are, they don't just confine themselves to a couple months. I think because the patterns take so long to design and to test and to market, I think we're going to see these trends kind of slowly eke out for about a year. Just kind of based on my observation of trends in the past and where I think they're going and where I think they will continue to go. I think that's highly likely. But yeah, like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm happy to be proven wrong. I'm kind of curious to see if my little predictions, my inklings of what I think is going to happen are actually going to be true, or if the market is going to take like a different turn than I anticipated. But anyway, I would love to know your feedback. So please leave me a comment on what you think, if you agree with my predictions, if you disagree, where you think the fiber arts community is heading, what you are actually interested right now in doing, whether that's knitting, crocheting, weaving, spinning. I want to know. So leave me a comment and let's have a chat. I'm interested. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video and catching up. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss another one. My name is Jess, and this is the Stash Podcast. See you next time.